Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. If you could see what I am doing as I say this intro, it's almost like I am conducting with my one hand. As I'm supposed to infuse a word with more energy, you see me push with my hand. Look, Bradley Cooper himself would be jealous of me right now. But let's get into this episode today. This is very good. I am talking today with ISMAY. And if you don't know who they are, I'm going to read you their bio right now. Originally from the Bay Area, musician Avery Hellman, aka ISMAY, grew up surrounded by music. Their grandfather founded the Hardly Strictly Bluegrass Festival, but didn't think they would pursue making music professionally until a crisis propelled them in that direction. Their first album, Songs of Sonoma Mountain, was released in 2020, and their latest album, Desert Pavement, was just released last week, and it's great. So is their first album. I remember hearing it when it first came out and put a little mental check mark. I should talk to Avery someday, and well, this is that day. And we have a wide-ranging conversation. I think one of the most interesting things, I won't get too much into it since we do talk extensively about it in the interview, but Avery comes from a dynastic banking family. And one of the big topics that we talk about that I don't think I've talked about on the show yet is the idea of legacy and about feeling the need to carry on a legacy. It's one thing, like, I think I babble about it a little bit. This is the first interview I did in 2024. You know, I took December off, so I did a bunch of interviews in November, took December off, and then this was the first one I did in 2024. So I think I was a little rusty, babbled a little bit, and hopefully I cut out most of the babbling. But there are things that my parents wanted for me. It's one thing to reckon with your parents' desires when it's just them and their beliefs, and that's it, right? And it's a lot to get out from under if you don't want the same things that they want for you. It's another thing to have generations upon generations doing a certain occupation, and there be this, what am I, a pirate? There be this expectation. There is a kind of expectation that is carved out of existence that you are supposed to, even if they don't want this for you, even if they don't desire this for you, there is this carved out hole that you kind of exist in. And it's not just their desires, it's this generational pull. So we get into that. It's very interesting. I really like Avery's music. So I hope you like this talk. I hope you check out their albums. Very quickly, you can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from. If you get your podcast from Apple Podcasts, why not leave a review? I spent about 10 years not asking for reviews, and only recently was like, maybe I should pay attention to that kind of stuff, because it does help other people find the show. I'm on social media, Instagram mostly, at Andy Beckerman, if you want to see pictures and videos of the animals and Naomi. And coming up on the show, I got some exciting interviews. Jewel Taylor, who co-wrote and directed one of my favorite films last year, They Cloned Tyrone. That's coming up. Andrew Kenny, the founder of the American Analog Set. Really great talk. Just recorded that over the weekend. It was wonderful. So stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Avery. Born in Petaluma?
So I was actually born in Hong Kong. My family was living over there, and I lived there until I was about 3.5, and then I moved to San Francisco.
What were they doing in Hong Kong?
Well, that was the era in which there were a lot of, Americans going over there and working as, the policies of that area were changing and opening up. And so my dad was working over there for a bank, and they had an office there.
This is okay. So look, I had a lot of questions swirling in my mind this morning as I was kind of reading about you. There was a bigger question that has nothing to do with your personal history and is more of like, as 2024 has, what are we, like 7 days into it? And I've just been like, what the fuck is it to make art in a collapsing empire? Like, is this what it felt like to, I don't know, in 1989 in the USSR, if someone was like a painter or something like that or whatever? And that was the bigger question in the back of my mind. You don't have to answer that now unless you've thought about it. We can talk about it later, but
yeah, that's a big question. I mean, you're getting into the territory of a essential human perpetual question of how much do you pay attention to what is happening in the world, and how much do you pay attention to what's happening in your world, and how do you make peace with that dynamic and find your place amongst that? I mean, that's always a great question to ask.
Well, then what I'll ask you I just pointed at you for the listener. It was very dramatic, a pointing with my finger, but how do you personally?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think we go with different seasons in our life about our relationship as artists to the outside world versus our inner world. And I mean, so much of art is about our inner world and expressing that. And in the past, I think I spent a lot more of my energy trying to integrate my music and my art with the outer world. When I left college, I spent a lot of time working on environmental restoration stuff. So trying to, take land that was in farming and to try to improve the ecological quality of that land. So a lot of my work with music was integrated with that. And I thought, how do I make music that somehow, deals with this idea of, healing land, so to speak. And that was a lot of what I did. And then, I felt like I kind of spent my time doing that. I really put a lot of time into it and eventually got to a place where I was just more committed to making my art as I could. Because, anytime you're involved in anything, you kind of get to a place of like, is this going to be my day-to-day life forever? Am I mentally capable of continually, dealing with this issue? Or is this something that, I want to leave to the next group of people who's going to do a job of doing it? And for me, it was really challenging to be a songwriter and be all these other things. I'm kind of one of those people that tries to be a lot of things at once. And I had to kind of work on that. So that being said, my approach nowadays is very much to focus on like, how do I make a difference in my immediate community? I mean, that's super important to me. I've kind of taken the scale of what I'm capable of affecting to more of my like tangible effects, and it's important to me to try to contribute to my community. But it's become much more like tangible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think one of the things I've noticed over my lifetime maybe was the scale of what people are actually able to affect. And we're at this point where you can maybe affect things municipally and probably affect things in your community, whatever that means, smaller than your city. But anything larger than that is totally out of your control. And I don't mean this in a what's the word I'm looking for? I don't mean this in a nihilistic way, like you shouldn't try. I mean this in the structure, these large scale superstructures are grinding us all into meat. And we should try to resist whatever that means. Or whatever that means to you, when I say grinds you into meat, whatever thing is grinding you personally into meat, we should try to resist. But it's largely out of your hands in terms of like you being able to affect anything personally. And so I've noticed like a lot more mutual aid, especially the last 3 years and things like that. But the thing is, I'm curious, was this I always ask this on the show because I really wonder how much of this stuff is conscious. Like when you were, what was your actual job? Like when you said, I don't even know the term because it was new to me. What was the actual job you were doing? Land?
Yeah, so I was basically helping, like my family had a ranch and I was raising livestock and helping manage the property. And so some of that involves like working with nonprofits or just doing work because you feel like it to basically do like ecological restoration, which just means like...
restoration.
Yeah, which just means like planting trees in creeks. removing trash. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can do. But so yeah, the job was actually more like rancher land manager was the job.
Okay.
And, any rancher or land manager can, lead from their values. And I actually came to like farming and ranching because was really interested in environmental issues. But I also appreciated the side of it of like, people have to eat, people have to have jobs. I think that land in general in rural communities, they're supported by people who are there and have a strong sense of community and a strong sense of being valued. And I don't know, all those things kind of tied together.
Okay. So at what point was there a conscious thought, I don't like this, this is not that fun, or this doesn't fulfill me, or whatever it was. And what I really like to do is concentrate on writing music because that's the thing that does fulfill me. Was there a conscious thing, or did you just start to over time drift and be like, I'm going to spend more time writing music and leave this to someone else, or hire someone to do this instead of me?
That's a great question. So yeah, there was definitely a tangible moment. I think just to go back, like when I started doing that job, I was starting to become a songwriter, and I felt like I didn't want to just be out in the world with nothing to say. I felt like, okay, I want to have experiences and have something to say about my life. I was only, 20 years old when I started playing music, so I didn't have all that much interesting things to say. So I wanted to get into ranching, environmental stuff, because I wanted that experience, but I also wasn't sure, like, do I have what it takes to be an artist? Do I have the talent? Do I have, the fortitude? And so I split my time between playing music and doing this ranching environmental work. And the pandemic happened. Everybody who was working at the ranch alongside me couldn't come to work, except for one person. So it was me and one other person, whereas typically in a day it was several people working. So I had to step up and go back to kind of full-time working at the ranch. And, I was out there kind of doing the grunt work, feeding the animals, planting the plants, all that kind of stuff. And I just felt like, wow, this is not my calling the way music is. You see a lot of people, especially people involved with sort of like environmental farming stuff, where it's like, this is their everything. This is their life. They're so good at it. They just get it. They have that ability to be outside hour after hour in the beating sun and like a smile on their face, And I just felt like I don't have that the way they do. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I had gained the experience in the real world that I had some more to say with my music. And so, yeah, there was a moment I was talking to this woman and I said, you know what? I feel like, ranching, farming, environmental stuff, that's like my job. And music, art is like my life's work.
Here's the thing. The idea that you would be going into this in the first place when you were 20 and say, like, I don't have enough life experience to write anything meaningful. That seems like a very self-aware thought, as opposed to, I don't know, when I was writing, I was in a band and we just wrote whatever. I mean, I wrote about whatever books I was reading. I was reading like The Thin Red Line. So I wrote about that, which is a book about World War II. Or philosophy. I was a philosophy major, so I wrote about philosophy. And maybe once in a while I would write about a relationship, but obliquely, so that you couldn't understand anything that was going on, so that you wouldn't understand so there would be absolutely no vulnerability. But I didn't understand that at the time. I just knew that I was too closed off to actually talk about anything meaningfully. It was just instinctual. That's the reason why I'm asking these questions, because for me, a lot of this stuff was like just gut feelings until later on. Then I started to think about it in a deeper way. That seems very self-aware. Is that true? Are you that self-aware? Were you that self-aware when you were younger?
Yeah, I mean, I would say my personality is probably like self-aware to the point of dysfunctionality somewhat. Like, it's not always good to be so self-aware as I am at times. So my way of approaching music, and it sounds like it's different from yours, like I am a kind of a person where it's taken me, 5-10 years to find what I have to say. It wasn't already there. I'm a person who struggles a little bit more with saying what I really think. And, sometimes that's masked by self-awareness, because I think, having a little bit of a lack of self-awareness could sometimes allow someone to have a confidence that's actually like useful. And I didn't necessarily have that. So, I think you make an interesting point, though. I have to say, though, writing songs from being a reader is already itself a pretty awesome place to come from, though. That's kind of where I'm getting to now. And I don't think I'm right to have necessarily thought I didn't have anything to say. That's just who I am. I don't know. It just takes me a while.
It wasn't so much like I didn't even think about that. That's what I guess I didn't think about, like, do I have something to say or don't I? I was just like, I enjoy writing songs. I don't want to write about what's going on inside me. And I don't have the capacity yet. I didn't become politically aware until I was about 22 or so. So I literally have nothing to say about the world, really, except like vague kind of truisms about the left, I guess, whatever. What was going on in late 90s? I don't know. It was stasis. The 90s were really stasis up until about 9/11. Up until, no, this is where I clock it. Bush v. Gore. That was the real, like, moment. Anyway, but up until then, it was just like stasis. It was just kind of like things were happening in another place and it didn't register. Like, I don't know how much younger than me, but you're younger than me. And you grew up, I would say, like, you were probably consciousness formed well, let's see here. You were a kid in Hong Kong. So you were like how old were you when like 9/11 happened or Bush v. Gore, like 2000? Like,
yeah, I was about in probably third grade.
Okay.
When all that happened, fourth grade.
So most of your life has been lived in whatever this is of the 21st century.
Yeah, I definitely, that's definitely the case. We're from different generations, and I think that, that was a transformative moment for us too. But I think, I kind of came of age when Obama was elected. That was a little bit more of like my adulthood was of that era.
Yeah. So it was just fun for me to write. I wasn't that self-aware as you were. And so it was just like, all right, well, what am I reading about, or what's in my head? Okay, the stuff that I'm reading at the moment. And it wasn't like I was like, well, I'm very erudite, so I'm going to write about these books that I'm reading. It was just like, I got to write some lyrics, and it's got to be about something. It can't just be absolute. It's not guided by voices, not absolute nonsense. There has to be something there. And that was the process for me, at least. But you thought this is the thing that is kind of surprising me, is that you had this absolute like conscious thought, I need to live some kind of life in order to make music. And I'm curious about that impulse. Where does that impulse come from? As opposed to, you could have just written about what you were reading about or watching on TV or anything, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. Why when I was 19 years old did I think I have to have something to write about? This is what I would say it is. I grew up in the era of, I was kind of an urban kid, kind of a suburban kid, kind of, a rural kid in some different ways. And to me, that era was, if you're suburban, you don't have a perspective. You don't have anything interesting to say. Whereas if you're an urban kid, you have a cool perspective. If you're a rural person, and I was just kind of in between. I don't know that I felt like I had all that much of an interesting background to write about. I was like, who cares? I don't think that's necessarily true. I think everyone has a perspective. It's just a matter of finding what that is. And, I also was just really fascinated by the world of like, the rural West, mostly about ranching, about environmental stuff in the West. And I just independently of being a musician was just fascinated by that. And I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to be a part of this culture that I really found at this place called the Western Folklife Center, which is in Elko in Nevada, and just deals with a lot of people who are making music, doing poetry in the rural West. And I was just fascinated. I mean, I think that's where I came from. And just as you were fascinated by philosophy, that was the world that I was obsessed with. And then, like I said, I'm just not the kind of person that's like, everyone needs to hear what I have to say. Here I am. I'm going to think of what to say afterwards. What I think. I'm kind of more of a thinker type person. And I mean, a lot of people go to big cities to be artists, and that's great. That just wasn't me, and I didn't want to be that. And I think it's a little bit more of an uncharted territory to be. I want to, be a more like rural artist. I don't want to live in a big city.
Wait, so what is the Western Folklife Center, and how did you find it?
Yeah, so the Western Folklife Center is this group that's in Elko, Nevada, which is eastern Nevada, so it's one of the most remote parts of the country. It's off I-80, and basically they started doing this event that's called the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering. So they bring people from, around the world, but also the rural West to come together and do poetry. And most people think, okay, wait. People in small towns in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming write poems.
Don't put that on me. I don't think that.
I'm not putting that on you. Okay, you don't.
I think anyone's capable of poetry.
I agree. Yeah, and they are, and so that's kind of what they represent. It's different types of communities that live, in the rural West or kind of engage with quote unquote cowboy culture. It's not one community, and so they put on this National Cowboy Poetry Gathering every year, and there's a tradition of cowboy poetry, which is traditionally written. People who are working on ranches, on horseback, are writing poems while they're working. But then there's also, opportunities for all kinds of poems to come together. And then they also have music too. There's sort of traditional music of the West. And then there's people like myself who are trying to write, modern music reflecting the current world in the West.
Okay. So let's back up a little bit. Hong Kong. How much of that do you possibly remember as a 3.5-year-old?
Yeah, I don't remember much. I have a couple memories. Of living in Hong Kong. And I have 4 older siblings, and so they remember a little bit more. And I think, our family, learned a lot from that experience. It's an amazing place. There's amazing people there. Hong Kong is a beautiful city with these beautiful parks, and changed a lot over the decades. But anyway, so that was a little bit of my beginning. And then I lived in San Francisco up until I was probably in 4th grade. And then I lived in the suburbs north of San Francisco.
In Petaluma.
So I lived in Marin, which is next to Petaluma.
Okay. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm just trying to untangle, because if I've done my research correctly, like you come from kind of like a line of bankers. Is that true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, this is where I find this to be interesting. But also your grandfather was into kind of country Western music. And I was a philosophy professor. I don't know if you've read any Hegel, but his whole thing about history is there are just bits of history. Like history is just this is how I conceptualize it. This is not him, just so we're clear. But this is my thing. History is like a stew. And all the little parts of the stew, as history goes on, different parts float to the top. And so you get different configurations. And the stuff, like there are things from decades ago that transform throughout time. So you come from this family. So are any of your siblings bankers? No. So it ends kind of with your dad, but the country Western influence thing goes on. If that and turns you into an artist in some way. I mean, obviously you make conscious decisions, but there are these strands in your history that some of them stop. And I'm curious about like how that formed you, if that makes any sense at all as a question. I realized the stew metaphor maybe brought it down a little bit to earth, but the rest of it, I don't know. I'll let you decide how strange that question was.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I don't want to go too far back and get too explaining about everything, but it's just like, I feel like I'm in therapy. This is great. So you're right. My family kind of goes back bankers. My family, they were Jewish immigrants. They came to Los Angeles when there were only a couple thousand people here. They started a store, just a little dry goods store. That store turned into a bank and set off multiple generations of people working in banking, kind of doing their duty as they saw, to their family and supporting their family and all that. And then, my grandfather was born in around 1933. He grew up in San Francisco. He moved to New York. He was a banker. He got really into banjo when he was in his 30s. So he was kind of already on his trajectory, successful guy.
Can I interrupt you for a second? What year is that? Like, are we talking banjo? Like, in my mind, I'm like, this is not Depression era. He's not that old, is he? I don't know.
So he was born... probably around the Great Depression, and then came of age around World War II. And so he didn't get into the banjo. So it was, I guess probably around the folk revival, but he was not an alternative person at that time. I wouldn't say he wasn't going down to the clubs in, Greenwich Village or anything like that when he was living in New York. Not to say I know everything about him, but I don't know if that's what it was. He served in the military, so he was a little bit more of that kind of more of a rigid guy of like every hour of the day you work and you go through these institutions. But then there's this strain of him that was more interested in something completely different from himself. So he got really fascinated with bluegrass music, with playing the banjo. A short little story, he didn't really know who Pete Seeger was, but he wanted to learn the banjo, so he's like, oh, I'll just reach out to Pete Seeger and ask for banjo lessons. So he is totally unaware of that world. And of course, this is pre-internet. You can't just Google people. You kind of have to be more aware. So he was in a separate world, but he grew fascinated with bluegrass music, even though his family didn't have any background in it. And he was really into this woman, Hazel Dickens, who was a bluegrass singer, songwriter. She was part of Hazel and Alice, who were were like kind of the first female bluegrass band when it was a very male-dominated genre of music in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And he just became really obsessed with her music, with bluegrass music. And once he was kind of finishing out the final stage of his life, he decided to start a bluegrass festival. And in particular, because he loved Hazel Dickens and wanted to bring her out to California to perform.
Okay. So here's the question then. How does this filter down to you? Are your parents into music? How does this kind of, again, you make conscious choices. You don't have to follow. You could have become a banker. You could have become literally anything probably, right? So how does this kind of like catch in your brain?
So when I was growing up, I was about 8 years old when the Bluegrass Festival started. So I got to go to see like Emmylou Harris and Hazel Dickens and Alison Krauss play. And the weird thing at the time though was my family was a little bit more, I don't know, I would say separated sort of like emotionally. And so nobody in my family played music at Hardly Strictly Bluegrass. Nobody really played with my grandfather all that much, just here and there a little bit. And I never, in that whole time, even being amongst that music culture, I never thought, oh, I could be a musician when I grow up. It just never crossed my mind. I didn't think I was going to be a banker. I just never thought, Avery, you could be a musician. It just didn't cross my mind. I loved music. I played music. It just, I don't know. It didn't make that connection. And then,
did you have any thought of what you wanted to do?
Yeah. I mean, I think I wanted to be involved in environmental stuff. Maybe at one point I was like, oh, I love, designing stuff. Kids think of silly stuff, random things that they want to do. So I was kind of all over the place. So I played music, and then what happened was when I was 19, my grandfather passed away. And it was a big deal because he had started this festival. He was a beloved figure in the San Francisco Bay Area community, and he was sort of one of the leaders of our family. He kind of glued our family together. And when he passed away, he had been in a band called the Wronglers. instead of the Wranglers. He was very into humor. And so they played bluegrass, and they kind of welcomed me in, and they welcomed the rest of my family in, 20 plus people in my family, whereas before it only been a handful of people involved in any kind of music stuff. And that was transformational. For me and for my family. We went from people who went to see the festival, kind of did our own thing, maybe didn't think much of ourselves artistically. And then once we were welcomed into this bluegrass music community, just like a whole new world opened up for us. And that's how I got started playing music. So
what was the original ambition when you thought you would do environmental work? Like, where did that form?
I think it formed from being concerned about environmental issues starting when I was in 8th grade. I was involved in protests. Like, I organized a protest about climate change when I was in high school. We did a whole campaign when I was in 8th grade. I went to these protests in college, blah, blah, blah. I kind of did the whole thing. And I was concerned about it. And then the other side of it, too, is I took environmental science and I was good at it. I mean, a lot of kids just like to do things that people say that they're good at. And so I was good at it. And I was like, okay, I could do this. And then before I went to college, I was working at a farm, and the woman whose daughter helped run the farm, she was like, what do you want to do this as a job? I was like, sure. I mean, organic farming is cool. It's a cool job. And I was passionate about that.
Was there ever any pressure to go into the family business?
There was not pressure to go in the family business. I mean, I don't know if it was a gender thing. I mean, my grandfather, my parents were very much like, I would say, ahead of their time in terms of like, being open-minded about, gender, people, equality, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not saying they were, held me back or ever told me I couldn't do it. I just think for me, I just didn't see any reason to do it. No one told me, oh, this is a great job. No one told me it's a bad job. I think my parents, I don't know. It's kind of, they were so young when they got married. They were in their early 20s. They started having kids. And I think for them, it was more like, okay, this is the best job we can get. Let's just go forward with what we know. And, since I was in college, I just had a lot more time to think it over and follow my passions. And the era that I grew up in was like, do what you want to do. Don't do what anybody tells you to do. And I just guess I never found banking in any way interesting. And to tell you the truth, I don't know that people who go into it would necessarily feel that differently. I don't know. I'd have to talk to somebody and ask.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't talk to people who aren't making something. I mean, I guess well, I don't know. I don't know. I'm really like wavering back and forth as to what it is as a job in the 21st century. But it is okay. So so let's go back for 1 second then. Your grandfather, is that your paternal or maternal grandfather?
So it's my dad's dad.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did he feel pressure to go into banking, or did he, I mean, I don't know if you can answer this, or did he just not know what else to do with his life?
To speak for him, I've asked him a little bit about this. So he went to UC Berkeley, and that's where my parents met. And I asked him like, oh, why did you get involved in the same thing your dad did? And interestingly, he said that there were very few people in his school at the time who did that. So in a way, he was kind of like different. He was like, in the 1980s, wanting to go into banking from Berkeley wasn't necessarily like the most classic move, because a lot of people were relatively alternative. So that I do know about him. But I don't know. I mean, I just think when you're that young, you don't, I guess maybe there's just people like me who have ironically, since I said I have a hard time, saying what I think, I guess I don't have a hard time doing what I want to do. And maybe people just have different personalities. They just do what's expected of them or do what they know they'll be good at, probably.
No, I think that is a lot of people. I mean, one of the things that I'm very curious about on the show is just because you have these strands in your history, let's say, doesn't mean you actually have to follow them. You don't have to do anything. I mean, obviously some people are economically constrained. Other people are existentially constrained. I think a lot of people are actually existentially constrained. They think that life is a script that they're handed and they do this thing. Okay, I have a family, whether they want to or not. Some people want a family, but some people don't, but they do it anyway because they think that's what's expected of them. And so, you know, I do lean heavily on kind of existentialism. You know, people make choices and they don't have to do necessarily what they've ended up doing or what they could have ended up doing. And that's, I think, where I wonder about this stuff. And I wonder about, you know, like, just you know, in my mind, like with the fictional, again, I don't know what the reality of being a banker is. I just know the fictional or also the, you know, Wall Street or whatever, right? You know, the movie or whatever, right? I just know the fictional version of it. I don't know what the reality is. And I don't know what it feels like to do that or anything. So I don't know how it constrains your choices or opens up choices for you, or not you personally, but your parents, your dad. I don't know. I don't know if you've thought about it or if you've talked to him about it.
Yeah, I mean, that question, I do think about it all the time of these narratives. We all have personal narratives of what is and is not possible. We have narratives about what our obligations are. These aren't like objectively true that like you need to do X, you need to do Y. And I learned when I was in college from an environmental philosophy professor, like how powerful narratives are. And I'd never thought of that. I don't know. You know, I just studied, you know, did my little thing in high school trying to get good grades and get into a good school. And then I thought, wow, like the stories you tell about yourself and about other people are almost everything. I didn't understand that. I'm sure you understand that better than anybody with your background in philosophy. And so, yeah, you're right. It's these existential narratives of, I mean, I would imagine someone who goes into banking not because they're interested in it, because they feel obligated. They probably think
I think you're hitting upon the thing I'm trying to articulate, which is the idea of obligation. I wonder if in a dynastic type family like you come from, do you feel obligation strong in a stronger way than I do? And I don't know how to answer that, but I'm curious.
Wow, you're just getting real deep here. Yes, but I think there was a paradigm shift. I don't know if it was everywhere, but where I lived is that I was brought up to feel that I was obligated towards making the world a better place. I was not obligated to be successful at making money. To me, it was really, really, really important. That's why I got involved in environmental stuff and actually struggled to play music because I felt like it was too selfish. I very much felt this obligation of, you were raised, you know, in this dynastic family. You grew up in the Bay Area. It's an amazing place. You need to help other people. And I think that's great. But, you know, there's limits to that for every person. And there's some people that end up going a little too extreme and to a place of self-denial. And then there's some people who need that narrative a little bit more of like, hey, look, share a little bit more of what you have, share a little bit more of your energy. And so I think what I'm saying is that for me, the obligation was to like the larger world, not to being successful, but then being successful and making the world a better place is also its own form of, you know, of legacy. And so I guess what I'm saying is there is more pressure when you come from a family of like, you don't have to just like, you know, work at the general store. You could be the most amazing thing in the world. And that's the Bay Area culture too, in my experience, was like, you could be anything. You could start the next tech company. You could develop the technology that'll save us. You know, these things were present. And I've talked to other people and heard like, oh, that's not my family narrative. My family narrative is like, you get a good job and you support your family, or you do what's your passion. So yeah, I hope I'm articulating that well, but I think you've gotten to something that I don't think anybody's ever talked to me about before.
Well, the idea of legacy, I think, is very particular if you come from the dynastic family. Like the idea of like, okay, like your grandfather founds a entire festival. I think, if I remember you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like, doesn't your family have something to do with college? Like help founding a college?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, so he founded Hardly Strictly Bluegrass. My aunt and uncle, and with his support, founded a free clinic in San Francisco. One of my ancestors donated the land to University of Southern California.
Yes.
And so that's another relationship. Although I mean we don't have anything to do with it at this point. But yeah, I mean that's there, and those people were very. I think. Every person's different, but I think I definitely got a sense from my family of like, whatever you do, you really should try your best to make a mark in terms of giving other people things. I hope that doesn't sound too like self-aggrandizing, but I'm just being honest about what it was.
Yeah. No, you can only be honest about your experience. It's self-aggrandizing or not, which I mean, I personally don't think it is, but that's your life, right? And that's what I'm interested in, is that the force of that, which I don't think I felt. There was no force. There was a force from my family, from my parents, which I ignored or took a while to, but become a doctor or a lawyer, something like that, right? There was that feeling that I had to overcome. But I think a lot, I've been writing lately about ethics and about how ethics requires a critical mass, either a critical mass of people temporal, like at the same time, or through like the belief, like thou shalt not kill. Mm-hmm. That has force from thousands of years going back to, biblical times. I even tried to look up like the Code of Hammurabi. I guess that's the first kind of laws. Now I'm really walking out on a ledge, but I don't think they had a lot of stuff there about like, don't kill people. So we're going to the Bible. I think that's really where like, hey, thou shalt not kill, full stop. Don't do it. I think that's really where it starts. So, but we've got thousands of years of that. There's no like outside of just that kind of feeling, the force of having that for thousands of years. You feel, again, I don't know, I've never murdered a person, but I assume that if I were to, I would feel like it would not feel good in my body because of this force of thousands of years. So using that as a metaphor for your family, one's family, not necessarily yours. I don't have that force from my family. I don't have a thing that goes back, an occupation, an existential feeling that goes back generations, where you do. And I wonder if there was a force there that even if you're going to do something else, if it's not there in your brain or in your body. Does that make sense at all? Yeah,
absolutely. Like I said, it's this, like I've talked to other people that don't have this. It's this sense that there's so much you could be if you just try, that there's nothing holding you back besides your own inadequacy as a person.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. And that's a big part of it. And I think there's good things about that and bad things about that. I mean, I'm grateful that I have this sense that like, if I put my energy into something, that maybe something really good could come of it. I don't know that, but at least I have the possibility. But at the same time, it goes back to like what I just said, which is that if you're not really good at something, then you're not anything. It's like, I think when you don't come from a family like mine or a family that has this dynamic, it's sort of, you could just kind of live your life and that makes sense. Whereas like, if I'm just living my life, that's like, can be seen as a failure. This is like obviously not literally true, but I'm just saying this is sort of the narrative that can come about from being in one of these situations. I'm sure it's the same way people feel if like you have a parent that's a really successful comedian or an actor or a musician. It's like, even if it's a different field from what you do, this sense of like, what's wrong with me that I couldn't be this good at something, I
really want to go back to this thing you said about inadequacy, because I think having that in your body is really interesting. And I'm curious how you fought against that feeling. If you did.
Yeah, the sense of inadequacy. I mean, I think one piece of being afraid of being inadequate is not doing the thing that's riskier that you're not as good at that you might like better. I think that was probably part of it. And I think inadequacy is, an inherent part of being a creative person, especially nowadays with the amount of other people's work we're exposed to. It's like, they're doing better than me. This song is better than mine. That's something I think a lot of people struggle with too. But inadequacy, I think it drives me to feel, that's kind of my day to day, is like, I'm always trying to feel like I've done enough, that I'm not letting myself and other people down. And it never feels like enough. Maybe like 1 in 100 days, I'm like, dang, like I did enough today. Like I did it. And then of course the next day I'm too tired and can't do shit, but I can't do anything. And am I answering kind of what you're trying to ask me?
Maybe. Did your parents, I say maybe because I don't know if there's no answer I'm looking for. I'm just ask these and then I kind of like walk through the path that the answers create. Because what that brings up to me is, did your parents approve of this? Did they want something different for you?
Yeah, so I would say when I was in college and studying environmental science, my parents were excited about, I think, my ability to be maybe more like a traditionally successful person. And I dropped out of college after 2 years. I was just struggling a lot. I didn't drop out to play music. I just was having a hard time. And they were definitely like surprised, and I think were a little disappointed. They weren't mean about it, but I think that they were like, wow, you were on this track. I thought you could be sort of like, a state level, bureaucrat in environmental stuff. Something like that was like their dream, And I just couldn't keep doing it. I just couldn't go to the classes and write the papers and talk to the people who work for the municipal water board and pretend like I could handle it. I couldn't handle it. And that's when I started playing more music. I was like, I don't know if I'll ever be good at this. I just knew I had to. Music and art, whether or not it could be a career for me, was just too important to be pretending to be a different kind of a person.
Mm-hmm. Are your siblings more, quote unquote, traditionally successful in the way that you said?
My siblings are like me. They're more in sort of like artistic, involved in, things with horses and things with music. And one of my sisters is a photographer. So no, none of them and none of my cousins from our same generation are really like that either. We all kind of broke the mold. And honestly, I don't think my parents' generation were mad about it. They saw the downsides of the rigid, doctor, lawyer, banker framework that they all were really successful in. But I think having done that, maybe they just didn't romanticize it. They were like, good for you guys. You guys go do the things we've always wanted to do, but never thought we could.
Mm-hmm. When you said earlier that there was, I don't remember the exact phrase you used. I'll say emotional distance. I don't think that's exactly what you said, but you said that there had been some in the family. Can I ask about that? Like, what was causing that? And then do you think that's been resolved now?
Yeah, so what I was talking about is with my grandfather started the Bluegrass Festival, and he was sort of the one in charge of it. He played in his own band, but there wasn't anything where, grandfather's asking everybody to sit around the campfire and play songs together. That was not what it was. He did his own music, but we were separate. And, the Bluegrass Festival was kind of seen as his passion project. And we just kind of went there to support him and enjoy some live music. And then I think, my grandfather in the very last, weeks of his life softened up as a person. He was raised, in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And being, in the family he was in and being in the culture he was in, I don't think that softness was ever even a possibility. And he wasn't somebody, him and my grandmother were not people who were engaged in the alternative sphere of the world. They just weren't. They they were very sympathetic to it, and I think that they were, friends with people like that, but they weren't like San Francisco, hippies living in a bohemian house on Haight Street. They were like more sort of traditional people. And so I think in the last weeks of his life, he softened a little bit. I mean, I heard this story about one of my relatives who said that one of the last weeks, he was around, he was dying from cancer. They were sitting and watching a TV show, and he just went over and just held her hand. And that just wasn't something he did. So that was, I could tell that that was a side of himself. And when I went to see him the last time, he was kind of in and out of sleeping because he was on medication. He was very sick, and he said hi to me, and I got to play a song for him when he was, in the hospital. And then I think he was softening up, and then he passed away. And I think this sense of, parent-child hierarchy, the formality of our family, opened up. And everybody in my family started playing music together. So that's the thing, is like sometimes as hard as it is to lose somebody, hopefully it will be in a time that's, right for them to have lived a fulfilling life, which it was for him. Worlds can open up because dynamics shift, interpersonal dynamics shift.
I mean, I don't know if you can answer this, but do you think your dad grew up, or he was formed in the same mold, or do you think he broke from that in terms of emotions? Did he seek out warmth? And did he raise you and your siblings with more warmth? Or was it the same kind of thing for you? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah. I mean, I would say with my family, we were probably more of that like warmth than he experienced, and definitely more than my grandfather experienced. My grandfather's parents went to be like World War II pilots, and he was left with different family members. I think it was,
Jeez.
I don't know. Yeah. So I don't know how much about his childhood, but it was much more of like probably a very formal relationship, between parents and kids. And so over the generations, it shifted. I think my parents, I think it's pretty hard to be a Bay Area parent in the realms that I was in and not be, in terms of like relative to the rest of the world, pretty like touchy-feely. I mean, the least touchy-feely people in the Bay Area are probably like the most touchy-feely people in like the rest of the world. But I do think my dad definitely softened over the years, and was sort of fitting in with his era. But now he started playing music and being in touch more of the creative side of his life, and he's very much shifted as an adult, which I think one of the most powerful things that a parent can do with an adult child is show that they're capable of growth, even as that child comes of age. And that's what I saw in my parents that was so powerful, was like, my parents are seeing me more as an adult, and they're growing. They're not getting stuck at the age I was born. They're moving on new horizons. And that's what my grandfather did too.
Were you able to express yourself emotionally when you were younger, or is that something that's only come with adulthood?
I grew up in a big family. I was one of 5 siblings, and we were all within under 8 years of each other, so really close in age. And I think when you're of different personalities, you fill different roles. I mean, any psychologist will tell you that. And I filled the role a little bit more, I think, of the peacemaker. And what that meant was that I kind of realized, like, okay, when I was a kid, expressing your opinion gonna cause conflict. Just kind of go along, get along, make it easy for everybody else. And then I became an adult, and that stopped working for me because, wait, nobody knows what I really think. I don't even know what I really think sometimes. It was a struggle for me. And so I had to realize I was filling that role, and that'll always be my comfortable place of like the peacemaker type. But that's what's been so profound about music for me, is it's allowed me time to myself to write things I didn't even know that I thought, and say things I didn't even know I wanted to say. And with each record, I think, if you're going to be honest with yourself, you can find a deeper part of your psyche that I just have no other way to express it. And I was talking to, like, I had a therapist in the past, and she was wonderful. And I had this realization in therapy one day where I was like, oh, like, I'm the one in the family that writes songs, because I felt like there were so many things growing up I didn't get a chance to say what I had to say. And this is finally my chance. And that's why I think I'm so drawn to writing in general.
Was there a crisis point you hit with this, or was it just a natural evolution? Does that make sense?
Yeah, in terms of, I think me dropping out of college was a bit of a crisis point, because I was just not doing well emotionally. I was just really, really unhappy. And I had to face, Avery, you're unhappy. People can tell you you're doing great, but that's not the reality. And that was the crisis point where I had, for the first time, to make my own decision, which is like, I don't want to keep doing this. And that was a big deal, I mean, some people see it as a failure. I didn't see it as a failure leaving college at all, but it was, it was a big leap for me to make. And I'm really grateful that I did, because I had to do something that was really like, I need this. And yeah, and I mean, I also had to learn with family, it's the hardest, but I've had to train myself to say, like, when somebody says something to me, I have to think for a while and make a conscious choice. I'm going to say what I actually think right now. Like, it's hard for me. Mm-hmm. And I think it always will be, but it's a skill worth working on. And the thing for certain people, saying what they really think, like myself, can actually be a point of like growth and relief. And I know for some people, they say what they think too much, so maybe listening is more a place where they need to grow. But for me, that helped me be a more whole person, to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we're right at the end. And if you don't mind me asking, like, what happened? Because what I'm really curious about is, how did you face it? Like, did you deny it for a while? As we live in 2024 now, I see so many people denying reality around me, and it's an obsession of mine to figure out how this is going on. So if you don't mind me asking, like, what happened in college, and did you deny it for a while? Whatever it was, did you deny it? Did you push against it? What was the actual process?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I did well in school for a little while, and then by the time I was going back for my third year, the things that made me really have to face it was, like, I was getting physically sick. Like, I would wake up and have a stomachache, like, every day. I would get up in the morning and then I'd have to go back to sleep after a few hours. I just couldn't do it. Because
you didn't want to be doing, because you were on the wrong life path, because you're like, I don't want to be doing this, and you were and you couldn't confront it. Is that what's going on?
Yes, I think it was making me physically sick, like, and lack of energy to be doing something I really didn't want to do. And that just goes to show, like, I'm a person who has a difficulty confronting that. But that's an undeniable sign that your body is saying, like, this isn't working. It's like screaming at you, like, stop. And yeah, I mean, I think that was probably the thing that pushed it over the edge, was the physicality of it. And that's been true for, other parts of my life. But I think, to me, I think a lot of us have an inner voice of, this is working, this isn't working. This is wrong what this person said. This is okay with me what this person said. And we each have our own inner voice. And in other time periods of my life, I had to confront, Avery, listen to your inner voice. Mm-hmm. And that's what songwriting is. It's the inner voice that's finally like, the cage is opened, the ribbons are untied, like, let go, man. It is what it is.
Well, that actually seems like a very nice place to end. Avery, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's so cool to talk to you. I mean, you really wormed your way into my brain in a cool way, so I appreciate it.
But no, seriously, thanks again for talking with me. I'm a fan of your music, and I really like the new album a lot, by the way.
Thanks. Well, I'm really appreciative that you took the time to chat with me and ask some really interesting questions. It's like more in there, There's a lot to be said.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, have a great rest of your day.
You too. Talk to you later.
And we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh.